So great. Well, here we go. Let's get started. Hello, my name's Lana Vanderlee. I'm a professor at Université Laval, and I'm so glad to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us. While we share a little bit of research about what's going on in Canadian food environments. So today we're going to be sharing with you the results of a recent report that we launched on examining giving an overview of the latest research in Canadian food environments. And I'm so pleased to have colleagues from INFORMAS Canada joining today. I'll do a very brief introduction. We have Dr. Véronique Provencher from Université Laval, Dr. Marie-Ève Labonté from Université Laval as well. Mavra Ahmed from University of Toronto, Catherine Ma from Dalhousie University, Monique Potvin Kent from University of Ottawa, and Rachel Prowse from Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador should be joining us as well. So we're so pleased to have you here today, and we're going to share a little bit about our report. Just in terms of how this is going to work today, we're planning to present for about 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. So you can write your questions, please, directly in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. So without further ado, here we go. First, before we start, while today we're meeting virtually, I would like to recognize the land where I live, work, and play. So in the spirit of friendship and solidarity, we honor the first people of these lands. We're here at Université Laval, which is at the crossroads of the Nine-Wensio of the Huron-Wendat people, the Nidakina of the Wabanaki people, the Nitassinan of the Innu people, the Nitaskinan of the Atikamekw people, and the Wolastoqiyik of the Wolastoqey people. And I'd like to honor our relationships with each other. And many of you, because we're again digital, are joining from a different territory. So I just invite you to acknowledge your own place in these lands. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about INFORMAS, and some of you might be asking, well, what is INFORMAS? So let's start with that. INFORMAS is the International Network for Food and Obesity Research, Monitoring, and Action Support. It was established around 2013. It's led by Boyd Swinburne at University of Auckland, but really it's a very global network active in more than 85 institutions in more than 58 countries. And the objective of INFORMAS was to establish a set of methods that were published in a journal supplement in 2013 that can monitor and benchmark food environments, consistent methods, rigorous methods that could be applied across countries so we could have some between country comparisons, but also contextualized because it's really important that countries understand what's going on in their context. And so INFORMAS has been very active and we are part of that network. Now, I'm using the word food environment, so I thought maybe we should touch on, well, what is a food environment? For me, food environments, this is the INFORMAS definition, but food environments include the physical, economic, political, and sociocultural factors that influence dietary patterns. And that's our scientific speak for saying it's all the factors that influence what people buy and what people eat. And so that's very broadly thinking about what are some of these structural factors. We were fortunate several years ago to get some CIHR funding to implement the INFORMAS methods in their entirety, to really do a deep dive into what's happening with Canadian food environments. And so our network includes these researchers, but many more, as well as more than 40 trainees who have been conducting food environment research. And so what we did is we identified people who have already conducted food environment research who are conducting, as well as we conducted some of our own research together to really get this understanding of the Canadian food environment and apply the INFORMAS method. So some of these faces are obviously familiar, but a great shout out to this collaboration. And so the INFORMAS framework includes 12 modules that we have implemented in their entirety in Canada. The first is this green level, which is understanding the processes that influence food environments. So what are the policies, by the governmental policies, as well as private sector actions? We're not going to focus on that today because we've had a few webinars on that already. So today the focus is really on this yellow layer in the middle, which is the impacts. What are the impacts of those policies? What are our food environments? It's across 7 modules: food composition, labeling, marketing, provision, retail, prices, and trade and investment. And together, we're going to share data from all of those areas of the food environment today. There's also this layer of outcomes. So when we understand what our environment looks like, what does that influence? What is the influence on diets and on health? So we have a little bit of data to share with that as well today. And of course, we've been considering how can we think about this from a health equity perspective. So in February of this year, we launched our report, and it is available on the website. So you can check out informascanada.com, and I put the link in the chat as well, really to understand, okay, we have all the data. How healthy are Canadian food environments? Just broadly to understand our approach, because I think I see from our attendees, we have some international researchers as well who might be interested. So because we were pulling together a different research from different groups, we tried to prioritize and harmonize food categories for INFORMAS Canada when that was possible with the data that we had, either the raw data or in the research, to really choose some food categories, because that's often a challenge with food environment research. And then the big question of what is a healthy food? What is a healthy food environment? To characterize foods, we applied a Canadian nutrient profiling system. We actually applied 2. And so this was implemented in several of our modules, but we used the cutoffs for front of package labeling systems, which are generally greater than 15% of the daily value for sugars, sodium, and saturated fat. And just by way of information, Canada will have mandatory front of pack labels as of January 1st, 2026, which we're very much looking forward to, and probably is due to a lot of the research that INFORMAS researchers have been conducting over the last several years, and their advocacy efforts for that. And so we use these cutoffs to identify foods that are high in our nutrients of concern. And then we used another nutrient profiling system, the cutoffs for marketing, to identify foods that are low in nutrients of concern. That aligns with our regulations for health claims, and it's generally 5, 6, or 10% of DV for sugars, sodium, and saturated fat. And so that gave us sort of a tiered products that are low in nutrients of concern, moderate, or high. And so we generally use that approach across the different INFORMAS modules. This is our graphical summary. We like to call it a look at the numbers, pulling together some of the statistics that speak the most to what is the state of our food environments. And we're going to present some of those today, but this is also available in the report. And so now what we're going to do is go through module by module. My colleagues are going to present some of their data and share a little bit about their interpretation within each of these areas. So I'll hand over the microphone to Véronique.
Yes, hi everyone. So we will start with the food composition. So as you can see here, for that module, we use the data from the Observatoire de la qualité de l'offre alimentaire, or Food Quality Observatory in English, that is established at Université Laval and from which I'm the scientific director. And we also use data from the Food Label Information Program, so the FLIP program, at University of Toronto under the supervision of my colleague Marie-Ève. So since these 2 databases follow a very similar approach for data collection, we have been able to combine, to merge them together and keep only the most recent data that were available. So as you can see here, we had a total of 14,224 packaged food and beverage products that were from 2017 to 2022. And just a little word on how these data have been collected. So they have been collected by going in different stores and retrieve all the information available on the food packages, such as the information from the nutrition fact table that has been used to further analyze food composition. So in the next slide, when analyzing the data using the Canadian nutrient profiling system that Lana just presented earlier, we can observe that 64% of the packaged food product offered were high in sodium, sugar, and or saturated fat, while it was only 12% of those products that were low in these nutrients. So in the other slide, you can see also that in addition, we observed that these percentages vary between the different food categories. So more specifically, you can see here that 93% of muffin and pastries, 99% of frozen dessert, and 89% of processed and deli meats were high in 1 or 3 nutrients. And more specifically, you can see that some food categories were higher in a particular nutrient. So for sodium, 84% of fresh and frozen meats, as well as 84% of processed and deli meats were high in sodium, while 84% of frozen dessert and 74% of muffin and pastries were high in sugar. And then 73% of frozen dessert and 65% of candies and chocolate bars were high in saturated fat. So I think that numbers speak for themselves, and overall, these results show that improvement in the nutrition quality of the food supply is needed, particularly in the context of the Health Canada nutrition symbol that is coming mandatory in January. So now it's Marie-Ève's turn to continue with the food labeling.
Thanks, Véronique. So in terms of food labeling, we know it is one of the most widely used sources of information about food products. So in Canada, since 2003, most packaged foods are required to display a list of ingredients and also a nutrition facts table. And manufacturers may add as well nutrition and health claims on packages, which are optional statements about a product's nutrient content or beneficial effects of some ingredients. And as Lana and Véronique were mentioning, in January 2026, we'll have a new front of pack nutrition symbol when prepackaged foods will contain excessive amounts of saturated fat, sugars, or sodium. So the objective of the food labeling module was to characterize the use of nutrition and health claims and to assess the theoretical and concurrent presence of Health Canada's new front of pack symbol in 5 prepackaged food categories from the Observatoire, representing nearly 3,000 products collected between 2018 and 2022. So those categories were breakfast cereals, dairy and plant-based milks, dairy and plant-based yogurts, salty snacks and crackers, and cookies and granola bars. The label components were classified using the INFORMAS taxonomy, and the nutritional profile was evaluating using the thresholds of the front of pack symbol. So our results on the next slide show that almost 3/4 of products featured any type of nutrition or health claim, and such claims actually appeared on more than 90% of the milks, yogurts, and breakfast cereal categories. And when looking at the different types of claims, the most common at 62% were the nutrient content claims, such as source of protein. These claims actually most commonly refer to calories, fiber, and trans fat. General health claims, including statements such as healthy food or 100% whole grain, were found on almost half of the products, and much less frequent were the health claims at only 4%, which include claims relative to structure or body functions and disease risk reduction. So on the next slide now, I would say that most importantly, of all products carrying a nutrition claim highlighting a positive attribute, almost half of the foods would simultaneously be required in 2026 to display a front of pack symbol indicating they are high in a nutrient of concern. So such conflicting information may result in consumer confusion, undermining the goal of facilitating healthy choices. So this suggests an opportunity to improve our labeling regulations by restricting the use of claims when products carry a high-end symbol. Just before I head it over to Monique, I want to acknowledge the contribution of Sarah Maud Abran, a master's student with Lana at Université Laval, who has been conducting the work. So Monique, now's your turn.
Thank you so much, Marie-Ève. So what do we know about television advertising? So lots of people think, oh, television advertising, that's not important anymore. No one's watching TV, but that is not true. Kids are still watching TV. And what we know when we do analyses of children's stations, so stations like Teletoon and Disney and YTV, that there are 4.5 food ads per hour per station. So that means if a child is watching TV for an hour, they're going to see just over 4 food and beverage ads. And when we do a classification of those ads to see, are these foods healthy? Are they less healthy? What we find out is 94% of them fall into that less healthy category. So the food categories that were advertised the most frequently in November 2022 were breakfast cereals, yogurts, and restaurants. And in terms of breakfast cereals, those are the sugary breakfast cereals mostly. And in terms of restaurants, those are fast food restaurants that we're seeing. Next slide. Now, when we've done studies where we actually look at children's exposure to food and beverage advertising, so we've looked at that across lots of different cities in Canada. So here's some data just from Toronto and Montreal. And you can see that kids in Montreal who are watching TV in French are actually seeing very few ads per year on children's stations, food and beverage stations, or sorry, food and beverage ads. So just 87 across the year, which is very, very few. This is data from 2019, and that's because of the Consumer Protection Act in Quebec. In Toronto, and kids that are watching TV in English in Quebec, very different situation. They're seeing many more ads in the 400s per year. But then when you look at all the stations that kids are watching, so because they're not just watching kids stations, obviously they're watching sports on TV and other programs on other stations, they're seeing typically over 1,400 ads per year, regardless of where they live in Canada. So it's a huge number of ads that they're being exposed to on television. And again, all from the unhealthy food category. Next slide. Now, where kids are seeing the most food and beverage advertising right now in Canada is in digital media. So we've done a couple of studies like this over the last few years. One that was done in 2022, 2023, where we recruited 100 kids between the ages of 6 and 17, and we recorded what they were actually seeing on their smartphones or tablets. And because we asked them how much time they were spending on their smartphones and tablets, we were able to estimate that kids are seeing more than 4,000 ads per year on their smartphones or tablets. And for adolescents, it's over 8,000. So just a huge number of ads. And again, those products, 90% of them fell into the less healthy category. So just huge, huge exposure on digital media, where a lot of advertisers are kind of shifting their advertising dollars. So with that, I will pass things on to Dr. Rachel Prowse in Newfoundland.
Great, thanks so much. And so that marketing that Dr. Potvin Kent talked about can be reinforced in other settings where children spend time. So I have a few slides to present on other settings that is data collected by my research team and as well as Leah Mineker's research team, who couldn't be here. But we studied recreation and sports centers. So you have over 100 recreation centers randomly sampled across the country in 9 provinces. And we also asked them to complete a survey about sponsorship and food marketing. So when we look at these facilities, which are kind of like your hockey arenas, pools, multi-sport centers, they often include a canteen or vending machines. The majority of them will have at least some instance of food marketing, and the majority of that same kind of numbers, 86%, were for that unhealthy products, brands, or retailers. So that is present in these facilities, when it's upwards of, you might have anywhere close to 13 counts per facility. In the survey, we had over a third that said that they had some sort of sponsorship agreement with at least one food or non-alcoholic beverage sponsor. And these sponsors might contribute financial contribution, but the average is only about $500 per year. But as well, they might contribute in-kind donations like coolers or fridges or other things that might have branding that might contribute to an exposure. Next slide, please. You also see marketing on food packages, which can be placed, anywhere in our lives. So some work done from Lana's team in Quebec with that same kind of set of foods that was earlier talked about, looking at over 5,000 foods, 1 1/3 of products across 5 categories. So those breakfast cereals, dairy and plant-based milk, salty snacks, cookies and granola bars, 1/3 of those had some sort of child appealing technique. And these were often like appeals to fun and cool or visual design or branded characters. And most of those products with the child appealing packaging were less healthy foods. Next slide, please. Oh, there's the first one. And so you also might see marketing outside places where we eat or buy food, so stores or restaurants. So here in a sample of over 800 stores across 9 provinces, again, the majority of them presented some sort of advertisement outside of the store. And the majority of those would be also considered less healthy foods or brands. So you can see a pattern trending there. So this is some of Dr. Leah Miniker's work. Next slide, please. And then there's other spaces as well, so that we can look within schools, but we can also look outside near and around schools. So this work has been done looking within a set of schools, primary and secondary schools, and small, medium and large population centers, and then a kilometer surrounding schools as well. And there's surveys being done as well in terms of reporting of different things. So within that outside sector, 1 kilometer around a school, the average number of outdoor food ads varied from 8 in Halifax to 35 ads in Vancouver. So they are contextual, it does vary, but generally the majority of that would be considered unhealthy. And this is where you get that reinforcement. If a child is on their digital device, going to school, seeing an ad, you can have some of those product or brand advertisements reinforced. And then in that survey with schools as well, just over half had fundraising activities that included less healthy foods and beverages, and only 37% of schools had actually a policy restricting that. So there's definitely opportunities where children might be exposed to food marketing or policy levers that could be looked at in order to reduce access. Next slide, please.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. So, just to say, I mean, this work has been conducted by many, many researchers across Canada, but one of the beautiful things that INFORMAS is able to do here is bring together all of these different publications and these different sources of evidence to look at what is that total exposure, because this is a bit of our gap. We know that there's a lot of exposure from different sources, but what does that actually look like? So for the first time here in Canada, we created some vignettes. These are fictional characters, and we imagined their day in the life as they're going through their breakfast routines, and then they're going to school, and then they're playing, and they're coming home. How much advertising would they be exposed to? And so we just did a bit of a thought experiment. This is Michaela. She's 9 years old. Where is she exposed to advertising for unhealthy foods? Well, first starts on her breakfast cereal box at the breakfast table. When she's watching some TV before school, the news is on with her parents. She walks to school, she sees 10 ads. She buys a chocolate bar at a fundraiser. She's outside her grocery store, inside her grocery store. She's back on her digital device. Throughout the day, Michaela is going to see 37 promotions for unhealthy foods. That is an extreme amount of marketing. And I think that this is sort of the beginning, and we're trying to imagine ways where we can have some more data to show what this sort of how this is all this cumulative exposure to marketing is adding up. And we just have another example here with Marco. He's a little bit older. He's on his socials. He's at soccer practice, like Rachel said. He's seeing ads all over his rec center. He sees it on his food, he sees it everywhere. And so this is just one of our ways where we're trying to think about how we can use all of this research and bring it together to understand that sort of overall exposure. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Mavra to talk a little bit about food provision in public sector settings. Mavra.
Great, thanks very much, Lana. So building on the research that we did conduct on sort of the marketing of foods in public sector settings. Now let's look at characterizing those food environments in schools, hospital, and recreational centers. So these settings have been identified as key intervention points to promote healthy food environments. As many of us know, collecting representative data remains quite a challenge given Canada's vast geographic area and multitude of provincial and territorial governments who do have responsibility for key food environments in these settings, which are governed by different ethics committees and require different types of approval before research can actually be conducted in these spaces. So just to note, the data collected for schools and hospitals are not nationally representative and provide a small glimpse into the larger national food environments in these particular areas. On the next slide, what we do see is that in a sample of 112 primary and secondary schools, where they completed an online self-reported survey on various components of school food environments, including the types of food services available in schools, food and beverage availability, and school food policies. In these particular schools, they had at least one type of food service available, including a school food program or cafeteria or a catering system, as well as a vending machine or a snack shop. Most schools, about 89% of them, had either developed their own written school food policy or followed their provincial or school board school food policy or guideline itself. When we're looking at, on this slide, examining the healthiness of foods in schools, 82% of schools reported having at least one sugary drink available for purchase on a regular basis, and only 14% offered exclusively healthier options. Overall, just on the figure below, 55% of schools reported selling both fruits and vegetables regularly, but what we can also see is that 61% sold cookies and biscuits, 52% sold pizza with processed meat, and 41% sold commercial baked goods on a regular basis. On the next slide, we are looking at a sample of 152 hospitals where 65% reported having a written hospital food policy. Of that sample, 99% of hospitals reported offering at least one sugary drink, and 74% reported selling both fruits and vegetables regularly. But many, as you can see from the figure below, reported selling cookies and biscuits, commercial baked goods, and potato and corn chips on a regular basis also. And moving on to our recreational centers, in a sample of 134 recreational and sports centers across Canada, on average, only about 1/3 of beverages per vending machine were low in sodium, sugar, and saturated fat. And about 9% of vending machines sold beverages low in nutrients of concern. So what we're basically seeing over here is overall schools, hospitals, and recreational food environments have characteristics that can both hinder and encourage healthy dietary patterns. This data is highlighting that in these public sector settings, even though they have food policies in place, there's a widespread availability of unhealthy food options, and that current practices perhaps are falling short or supporting consistently unhealthy food environments across these settings. So what we are aiming for are comprehensive policies across these public sector settings. Over to Kathy, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mavra. So I'm going to cover a couple of slides about food prices and our work on food affordability. This slide covers some research also coming from Marie-Ève's group and her colleagues at the University of Toronto. And I believe I saw the lead author on these papers in the participant list, so we can, you know where to direct the questions afterwards. But on this slide, it was found that products with lower total or free sugar were more expensive in some food categories, and this research was conducted in the school environment. Next slide, please. And this food affordability work was from my lab, one of my PhD students, Nathan Taylor, who was doing some work on web scraping. One of the challenges of doing food environment research, as the other speakers have alluded to, is the growing digitized nature of this food environment. And indeed, many national statistical agencies are grappling with the idea that food prices are increasingly available both in the physical environment, but also in online forms. And it appears that when we look at prices in the online environment, they tend to give us a more accurate and precise look at where food prices are changing, such as contributing to inflation, than they may be through physical in-person audits. So this project looked at doing a digitized form of the National Nutritious Food Basket, which is Also of importance to policy now because it has been adopted as the food component of the market basket measure, which is related to Canada's poverty reduction strategy. So in this study, this was a national audit digitally of 751 stores of Canada's leading grocery retailer, and it was found that the highest estimates for this nutritious food basket were in the Atlantic provinces, followed closely by the territories. The last kind of point on this slide refers to those researchers who are on the call. If you do intend to use food supply prices for example, estimating diet costs or attaching those prices to diets, we've also been doing some methodological work in the lab on looking at how the source and the precision of those food prices may tend to bias estimates. Next slide, please. So when speaking about food affordability, of course, it's really important to keep in mind this broader context and the context of inequalities in Canada. So just to highlight that dramatic changes in the cost of living, such as we've been seeing in recent years, do not affect Canadians equally. We have really good monitoring of household food insecurity in Canada, which points to those who experience greatest financial hardship. And so that socioeconomic disparities in diet quality may be explained by things like the higher cost of higher quality diets, the differential pricing of higher and lower quality foods, as well as the budget available to and allocated to diets by eaters and households. And I think it's over to Lana.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So now I'm going to take you through the last two modules that we have, starting with food retail. And this is, again, a lot of the work that Dr. Leah Miniker at University of Waterloo has done. So when we think about food retail environments, we can think about neighborhood environments, sort of geographic exposure to healthier or less healthy food outlets, or just food outlets in general, as well as consumer environments within those retailers. So this is, again, from the 6-city study that Leah conducted, where she looked at how many food outlets are within a 1 kilometer radius, not a radius of sample schools, because we know that that means that those are places where they're potentially food purchasing opportunities, is what I like to think of this as. And so, as you can see in the data here, it varies across the country. In Vancouver, on average in the schools in this sample, they had 45 opportunities to purchase food within a 1 kilometer radius of their school. So, and what we know is that whether we can debate perhaps if what meat is a healthy food outlet or a less healthy food outlet, but almost all of those food outlets are providing opportunities to purchase less healthy foods, certainly. And as Leah showed, most of these, or as I'm going to show in a minute, most of these outlets, in fact, do have a heavy presence of unhealthy food. But this does vary. So in Kitchener, for example, there was only 19 outlets, 19 food purchasing opportunities. And so this is from several studies that Leah conducted in 13 cities, including in Canada's north, to understand, okay, in retailers, in these, what is going on in key placement areas. Key placement areas are at the checkout, at the end caps, and at island displays, because we know that those are where those are marketing opportunities, those influence purchases, and perhaps have a greater influence. And so Leah's team went and did audits of, well, is there less healthy food in those key placement areas? And I mean, it's a resounding yes. So 89 to 94% had unhealthy food at the checkout. 94 sold unhealthy food in end caps, and 91 to 98% had at least one unhealthy food in island displays. So those are just really, really high numbers, showing that even in particular, when we think about grocery stores, we think about, some of these outlets, what we typically might consider healthy, they still, in these key placement areas that influence people, are really promoting unhealthy foods. And I just wanted to point to one other statistic. In her 6-city study, the little yellow cities identified in the map here, 1 in 2 stores had junk food power walls. And if you remember back to the time when smoking was a thing, if you went into a convenience store or grocery store, and behind the checkout, we used to see these walls of tobacco. Well, now we see walls of candy. And so that has really shifted. And from a public health perspective, what we're seeing is 1 in 2 stores have these power walls that we know are influential to consumers. The last module is food, trade, and investment. This is some work by Ashley Schramm, who's at Australian National University, but she's Canadian, and so she was a great fit for this. She's led a lot of the INFORMAS work in this area. And there's a few statistics that speak to a little bit of how this food, trade, and investment, which is a little further from what we typically think about in food environments, how that might be influencing our environment. So this is just a quick look at foreign direct investment in food-related industries. And what we see here is that in particular for food manufacturing, foreign direct investment. So thinking about those huge multinational, big name companies, that the foreign direct investment increased from 10 billion to 32 billion from 2000 to 2022. And so we know that has some implications for what products are on the market here in Canada. And lastly, this is just some statistic on import volumes for key food categories in Canada that have been analyzed according to NOVA. So that's the level of processing, with a minimally or unprocessed foods being generally accepted as healthier because they don't have any additives, they don't have any salt, sugar, or fat added. Or all of up into ultra processed, which is the NOVA group 4. And what we can notice for here is that where we saw some very, very big increases in import growth, we don't see subsequent declines. And so, and this is particularly notable for the NOVA classification 4, so those ultra processed foods. So again, understanding that the foods that come into our food system often tend to be unhealthy, and we aren't seeing reductions in those unhealthy foods being imported over time. A couple of overarching areas that we also discuss in the report. One is on digital food environments, and Monique alluded to this, and Kathy alluded to this as well, but we know that digital food environments are changing. Digital food environments are becoming more of a norm. And so just at a very high level, digital marketing is pervasive and it's influential. We've looked at that in youth. We need to continue to understand what that means for adults. As well as some of the research that we found on digital food environments shows us that digital food environments aren't the same as in-store environments. Kathy already mentioned this in terms of the pricing or the data that we get from that. But as an example, some work from Jennifer Lee at Toronto Metropolitan University. In online grocery stores, only 61% of products had nutrition information. So when you're shopping in an online setting, you're not getting that access to nutrition information. That's a big influence, and that's a big part of our food environment, this nutrition information environment. Similarly, in online food delivery apps, what some work that I did found that only about half of products had calorie information. And that's even in Ontario, where calorie labeling technically is mandated. It is required on these online food delivery apps. So we also know that we may be lacking regulations to require that nutrition information, but also that compliance in digital food environments is different. So some really important work still to be done in terms of understanding these digital food environments. And lastly, applying an equity lens in food environment research. And I think one of the things that we really noted and highlighted is that we still don't have enough data in understanding what is the equity lens. How do we understand equity in food environments? We can look at inequities in exposures to food environments. So in comparing wealthier and less wealthy neighborhoods, if there's less access to healthy food outlets, for example, or more access to unhealthy food outlets. So there could be these inequities in exposure, and it's still quite an understudied area in Canada. But there's also this inequity in the susceptibility or the vulnerability to unhealthy food environments that we need to get a better understanding of, because even if we are exposed to the same food environment, people with less resources and capacity are not affected equally by food environments. And so we tried to tease out a few of the policy areas within the report of what could help to support better equity and reduce some of these inequities, but there's still more research to be done. So just wrapping up our presentation portion of this, what does this all mean? So yeah, food environments are bad and we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of gaps and there's, the data shows the evidence from the last 5 to 10 years shows us that we have a lot of work to do. And we did do, but what's the impact on health? So we did create these online resources. They're not located within the report, but they are available where we pulled together some available data to look at population diets, diet-related non-communicable disease, risk factors, as well as rates of non-communicable disease. But really, and unsurprisingly, what we know is that our unhealthy food environments are not supporting healthy dietary patterns. Almost all men and half of women are consuming too much sodium. 2/3 of individuals consume too much sugar, more than the recommendations. About half of our calories come from ultra-processed foods. We're spending 1/5 of our food expenditures outside the home. So these have really important implications in terms of our health and health outcomes. And just to say that, we can't expect that individual level interventions are going to get us out of this mess we have in dietary patterns. And so thinking upstream with food environments, there are policies that need to be implemented in order to address these major issues. So what can we do about it? Well, to start, first, we know that it's not an easy task. We know that healthy food environments takes political will, it takes policy coherence, it takes policies that are evidence-based, that are going to advance this important issue. We know that there will be obstruction due to conflicted interests. We know that this is a challenge. In particular, the food industry can be a major challenge in moving policies through. We also know that this is not just a food problem and it's not just a health problem. This is a problem across sectors, and that we need real commitment and engagement from all government sectors if we want to actually make change in food environments. We did use the INFORMAS methods to come up with a set of recommendations for what the federal government should do. And these were the recommendations from a group of 55 experts from across Canada. The first recommendation was to prohibit the marketing of less healthy food products and brands through all forms of media to which children may be exposed. In particular, it's our view that just banning marketing directed at children is probably not going to be sufficient, because as Monique mentioned, a lot of that marketing is not child directed, but children are seeing it anyways. Funding a comprehensive and universal national school food program, and hooray for the government for implementing that. Now it's time for us to make sure that if we're going to have better provincial and territorial school food programs, that we're creating healthy school food environments, that we're not exposing kids to additional marketing, that's really, we make this a strength and an opportunity to intervene to create healthier food environments. We also recommend mandatory limits for sodium, sugar, and saturated fat in both packaged and restaurant foods, because we have seen, as Véronique showed, that the current policies and our current approaches are not creating a healthy food supply, which is a cornerstone to healthier food environments. The fourth recommendation is to invest in inclusive strategies to support the affordability of healthy food. Here, we're looking towards the social determinants of health, and as Kathy alluded to, how can we improve access to healthy food? And that's policies like a basic income for everybody, that's improved social supports, because we know that that is going to increase access to healthier food. And finally, implementing a sugary drink tax and investing as a potential source of revenue to reduce health inequities, to improve our food environments. So these were the policy actions, the priority policy actions that came out of that work. But just to reiterate that it's not just federal policies that we need. We know that there are opportunities at provincial and territorial levels, as Mavra highlighted, for example, with schools and hospitals, that comes from the provinces and territories. And so we need to be considering what those most effective policies could be, as well as local policies. Municipalities can also play a role. Jean-Claude Moubarak, our collaborator at Université de Montréal, has recently implemented the Food Epi in Montreal. So this same identification of what kind of policies might improve food environments, what kind of local Montreal-based policies could improve their food environments. So what a whirlwind of data, of evidence, of policies. But at this point, I will say thank you, and we'll open up to some questions. So we have some questions in the chat already. So, or comments. So I'm just going to start. We have a comment from Magda Mook to say, we have found the issue with lack of availability of nutrition information online or even offline, especially for fast food restaurants. Any regulation that relies on nutritional information should also be accompanied by mandating information being available. Major restaurants in the UK did not have that available, and they are major players in marketing. Yeah, so just again, leaning into this idea that clearly there's that different online environments are starting to play a huge role, and that there's a regulatory gap there. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on this sort of digital divide and the lack of policy regulation. Perhaps not, no problem. We also have a question here from Benjamin Organ. I have a little French pronunciation in my head. In discussions of food policy at federal and provincial levels, we often see issues are highly politicized. Particularly from analyses of House and Commons rhetoric, we see strong policy opposition to food policy interventions driven by ideological differences. What considerations do you feel are necessary to navigate the political environment in support of consensus building around these policies? I might call on Monique to answer this one, who has been really active in generating the evidence to inform policies around marketing, because this is one where we have seen certainly some opposition. Monique, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, certainly. So there's been a lot of opposition to all these policies, and corporations and their associations, they have very, very deep pockets. They hire lobbyists. They get meetings with the high-level government officials quite easily. And so, I mean, what we need to do on our side of things absolutely is continue to do research in this area, and then to speak to policymakers about our research findings, to work with all sorts of non-governmental organizations. The Heart and Stroke Foundation has taken a huge leadership role with the issue of food marketing to kids, and they created the Stop Marketing to Kids Coalition, I think about a decade ago now. And that coalition just brings together more than 100 different organizations, all working together to try to push for food and beverage marketing restrictions. And forming coalitions on a variety of issues is a great idea. I know there's a big coalition organized also around the food nutrition, the nutrition program in schools, and so working together and kind of pulling our resources together and our information together is very, very beneficial. I think we are very lucky that the Liberal government was reelected. I wish it had been a majority government, but I'll take a minority. And I'd say, this is a great time to keep pushing for food environment policies. So I'd say, we need to just keep working on it, because policy change is not something that happens quickly. My students always kind of shudder when I say I've been working on food and beverage marketing restrictions for the last 15 years, but we are going to get there. We're close.
Thanks, Monique. Kathy, I see you opened your microphone. Did you want to add something? And then Mavra, I see you too.
Yeah, my additional comment is that, I mean, there's many researchers and scientists on this call, and I think I guess this is my call to also for us to be really laser focused on the quality of evidence that we're using when we're communicating about policy options. And increasingly, I think it's really important for, like, if we have detailed understanding of the methodology and particularly the limitations behind some of the evidence, that we don't, exceed that when we're communicating those pieces of evidence in policy forums, because having that expertise and communicating like why it's important to, judiciously look at the evidence and to then kind of transplant that separately into a societal debate, I think it's important for us to do.
Great, thanks, Mavra.
I'll just add to that, actually. Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Ben, for that question. So Ben is part of our team at University of Toronto. And I just want to add one little bit is, when you use localized data or case studies to really demonstrate the real world benefits of intervention, I think that's where the real change starts to happen. So as an example, when we are starting to include student voices in why school food programs matters to them, that's where we're going to make a difference. So I just want to add that one little point, when we're talking about data and data collection and our methods as well. But thanks for that. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Sorry, Rachel, did you have something to add as well? Go ahead, please.
Just in terms of the ideological differences, I think we don't necessarily always spend enough time trying to find those similarities, as I think it's hard to argue that we care about children, right? So if you find that common ground and then start to build from there, I think that's where you make some progress, which is why I think the marketing to kids work has been more successful than other things. So if the ideology is around people need to have their ability to choose, you can have that conversation around that. But what is actually allowing somebody with different incomes, different lifestyles, different opportunities to choose, and how can changing healthy food environments do that, rather than just saying, actually, it's keeping the government out of that is the best way to keep people to have choice. So I think sometimes just like getting down to basics can be really helpful ideologically.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, at an international level, for sure, what we see is these coalitions and alliances are fruitful. And it's not just within researchers and it's not just within advocates, but it's the alliance of all of those groups and aligning the vision that I think has some real potential power. So yes. And I see just a comment from Manny Arango at Heart and Stroke, and just to say Heart and Stroke was also one of our knowledge users on this, and we have been grateful because that helps inform our research. It's a little bit like what we're talking about, but knowing what are the evidence needs of different groups who are working very closely in that policy space has been a key piece of this. I have a question that I'd like to pose to all of the researchers. INFORMAS, we didn't talk about it today, but there's a lot of it in the report. What can we look to from other countries? INFORMAS is global, and INFORMAS likes to highlight what is going on in other countries. So in your policy spaces, what are some of the policies that inspire you from other countries that you think we should be looking towards? Kathy, go ahead.
Well, I'll give a shout out to the ICDAM or ISDAM as the society, that because it just came back from that meeting. And I will say that seeing the other countries' investment in their food and nutrition composition tables, like as the foundation for what they do, having like investments in the infrastructure for national nutrition surveillance surveys on a regular basis with attention to food environment, like that's an investment that we need, and is again like a foundational piece that would really help us moving forward, and that other countries are making much more investments towards.
Great, thanks. Monique?
I would say that the UK really inspires me in terms of food marketing. What they're moving towards, well, they just haven't implemented the policy yet, but it's coming soon, is a time-based restriction on unhealthy food and beverage advertising. So it would be no unhealthy food and beverage advertising on television up to 9 o'clock at night. So it actually protects children and adults alike up until 9 o'clock at night. And in digital, they're looking to do the same thing, just a very broad ban on unhealthy food and beverage marketing. And I think that type of policy is going to be so impactful. So I'm excited to see the implementation that happens in the UK. And I would love for Canada to move in a similar direction.
Does anyone else have any policies or pieces that are interesting? Yeah, Marie-Ève.
Yeah, maybe I can go ahead with food labeling. I think we should be probably looking at Argentina, for example, who has a regulation that does not allow health or nutrition claims on foods that carry front of pack symbols. And similarly, there is Mexico and Colombia, if I remember well, who also restrict health claims on foods that have a nutrient-specific front of pack symbol, or actually on foods that carry at least one symbol. So we have examples elsewhere in America where this is implemented and it's working.
Great. Thanks, Marie-Ève.
Just to add to the packaging piece, Lana, in Chile, they've banned Tony the Tiger. So I was actually in Chile over the Christmas holiday, and I specifically sought out a grocery store so that I could go down the cereal aisle and take photos of cereal boxes. And sure enough, they've redesigned their cereal boxes so that they don't have, you know, the mascots that we're seeing on our cereal boxes that are just so appealing to children. So I think that type of approach could be very effective.
As someone who fights every time we're in the cereal aisle because we want Lucky Charms, I would agree with that one. Great. Mavra, I see you unmuted. Did you want to have maybe a final word with the policy?
Sure, just to add a little bit around the schools, I guess, the school food programs. I mean, certainly, you know, our programs will have to be tailored to the Canadian context, but we can certainly look to countries like France and Japan in terms of their models around integrating culture and nutrition education. And that's something I'm looking forward to, hopefully in Canada as well. Thanks.
It would be interesting to see how that plays out. So yes, I agree. I think it's an opportune time for us to invest in healthy school food environments. Yeah, for sure. And we need to say a special thank you to Mavra because she's in Australia. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning now for her. So thank you. So with that, I'll just say one final word to say thank you to the presenters today for sharing some of their expertise and for this collaborative effort. As you heard, we have lots of collaborators on INFORMAS Canada. If you're interested in collaborating with INFORMAS Canada, please reach out. I've humbly included just my email address on the last slide here, but if you're interested in what we're doing and want to be part of this, we would love if you would reach out to us. So thank you for joining us. Thanks to our presenters, and we'll look forward to the next report, which we hope to publish in 4 or 5 years, where we can benchmark and see how we're doing. I hope I get to report on some progress. So thank you all.